It's the Kick and Snare podcast. Let's count it off. Welcome. I'm Michael Nevins, and I'm the host of the Kick and Snare podcast. My guest today is Alan Chappell. Alan, welcome to Kick and Snare.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I'm looking forward to this.
Good. Me too. I've been eager to do this with you, as I mentioned earlier. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Well,
I'll start with a little bit about Alan. He's the president of Chappell and Associates. He's outside counsel and chief privacy officer for ad tech, what we would call ad tech, but many would need to know advertising technology companies. He also publishes a monthly syndicated research report covering strategy behind the digital media regulatory environment, and that's on worldwide, global environment. Am I right?
You're right.
Okay. And that's just the beginning. As I spent time preparing for this, I realized, Alan, you might be the world's busiest man. You have so much going on. So I'll list some of it. In addition to Chappell and Associates and the Chappell Report, which is what we call the analysis paper, Alan also hosts a great podcast called The Monopoly Report, which focuses on legal and antitrust issues in big tech. And certainly, I should also add you're a co-host of another podcast, a Future Media, a podcast with Ricky Sutton. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, which is similar to the Monopoly Report. The Monopoly Report is more focused on the ad space. Mm-hmm. And I think the Future Media one is really more focused on the impact of big tech on life and culture. And of course, there's some business component to there too.
Understood. So you should all check out Alan on LinkedIn. You'll find him. You'll find these podcasts and ways to interact. And I'll include some links and things like that, when we publish this one. But you have that would be enough, right? That would be enough right there. But as I like to say, but wait, there's more. And I should point out to everybody, I know this already, but I was pleased to find out that Alan is also an accomplished songwriter, singer, keyboard player. I hesitate to just say musician because there's so much more to it than that. And you've been active in music and I guess in the music industry as well since childhood. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I played my first concert at 5. And I don't know if it was a concert. It was the basement of the Ferguson Library in Stamford, Connecticut. And there was a talent show. And I wowed them with like the first verse of Nowhere Man by the Beatles.
Oh, perfect. I think that counts. I mean, performance, recital, it's all good.
Well, that in some ways was the worst possible way to start out a musical career. Because picture this. I'm 5 years old. I get through maybe like 3/4 of the first verse before I forget the rest of the lyrics. Then I go, that's all there is. Standing ovation. So now my expectation of how easy the music industry is from that point on was completely wiped away.
That's fantastic. I understand. Yeah, it could be daunting. And I have some questions about that later, certainly. Anybody who's participated in music has had their ups and downs. And so I'm curious about that component of it, but we'll get into that. I'm always interested to learn more about people beyond their professional careers. And so, to go beyond the sort of vocation and get into the avocation, people's passions, often unexpected. Some people might meet you and not know anything about your musical background and your musical interest or your talent. And I'm fascinated with this aspect of people's lives. Those who have even very successful, all-consuming careers still often find time to do other things in art or music or any other charitable work and otherwise. And so this is a theme that I'm personally interested in and like to talk to professionals about. So let's talk about that balance thing. So balancing a legal career, a music career, a family life, podcasts, this is no small feat. Like, how early do you wake up every day?
So, I'll say this. Over the last few years, I've actually gone in the opposite direction where I get more sleep. I think that is sometimes counterintuitive, but I do feel like I get a lot more done if I can really get close to 8 hours.
Got it.
Which is funny because when I was in law school, I was getting like 4 hours of sleep a night, but I was also a little crazy back then.
Got it. So that leads me to the second question on this topic, which is how do you find the time and I guess the energy and what strategies do you use? And so you're getting more sleep. How are you so efficient during the day to be able to do all these things? I do one podcast and I'm struggling to keep up. So I'm curious.
I think part of it is not having a real job. And what I mean by that is like, I've been doing my law practice for 20 something years. I rarely, even pre-pandemic, go into an office. I rarely, I'll visit clients occasionally, but I really try not to. And if you can just remove the commute, which I have friends who are still doing like an hour and a half each way commute.
That's a
you
lot.
remove that from the proceedings, and you're in a much, much better position. Because I wake up, I chat with my wife and daughter, we get our daughter off to school, and like by 8 o'clock, I'm ready to go.
Right. Yeah, that's relatable. I seem to be getting a lot done and then still find myself with some time to have some fun. I go play drums for an hour late in the afternoon. I feel less guilty about that than I used to because, I have the same advantage of working for myself now. So it's nice to have a little more control over the time, and certainly losing the commute is a fantastic thing.
Yeah. But also I think, look, I do what I have passion for, and I have passion for a lot of things, and not to oversimplify, but it sort of makes me sad when I can't do some of those things. I will say the last few months, I've been really busy on like what I'll call work, the law stuff,
Sure.
the pundit stuff. And some of the music has suffered. I had a number of years where there was not a Saturday that went by where I wasn't spending the entire day writing. That's a little more difficult right now because I've got some other things I'm juggling.
Sure.
Not the least of which is a 5-year-old who loves my music, but also loves me to reenact scenes from the movie Frozen. So you got to balance things.
At least it's musical. I
That's a
imagine that
good
creates
point.
some
Yeah.
opportunities. I get that. Yeah. One thing I've noticed, and I imagine you have, and you will experience it the same way, or are experiencing it the same way, it comes in ebbs and flows, right? Business gets busier, music stuff, projects come and go, and I like to stay engaged in music all the time, one way or the other. And it varies from playing in a rock band. I play jazz these days, or I'm trying to, learning, doing home studio recording stuff, whatever. And a lot of it is just about living in that space, that mental space of being creative and thinking about music, and if not actually making it. But I hope you'll find that balance when you need to.
And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. For a while I was out playing a ton. I'm probably playing a little less now, although I've got a couple of things planned this summer.
Oh, good.
But there's always, a half-written song that you can get verse 3 sorted. There's always. I was just listening to something that I haven't released yet. I'm like, you know what? I might be able to beat that vocal. And so, all right, that's in the back of my mind. One Saturday when the coast is clear and the lovers of my life are off at a park somewhere, I'm going to try to beat that vocal.
Makes sense.
And so there's a lot of little ways to do it to continue to be creative.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move on from that songwriting topic because I have specific questions about it that I plan for later in our talk.
Okay.
So we'll come back to that. So you're doing music, law, tech, analysis in parallel for a good part of your life from what I've researched. And, you started, you were an analyst, I don't know if this is where it all started, at Jupiter Research while you were in law school. Is that right?
I was, yeah. The Jupiter time was a really interesting time for me because, I was probably working 55 or 60 hours a week and going to law school full time. And so, but you just sort of get efficient because when you have to, you can get really efficient. If you gave me all the time in the world, I would get nothing done. I'm sure of that.
Right. So I'm curious about what drew you to law school, but I'm also really curious about how all these things manage to coexist in your life. Clearly they're compatible or you wouldn't be here. But I'm curious, law is consuming for a lot of people, and certainly studying and getting through law school and passing the bar is a consuming thing. And you're doing that while you're working 50 or 60 hours. It seems crazy, if not impossible, but you manage somehow. Tell me more about that.
Well, okay. So the sequence was like this. I thought I was going to make it big in the music industry. And then the Seattle grunge scene happened. And I'm a keyboard player in an 80s pop band. And so there was no work in New York for several years.
Right. You couldn't just put on flannel and go do it. No,
that just was never my scene. And so in a last gasp, I joined a band in Bombay, of all places, and lived there for I don't know, 5 or 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And then when that ended, it was sort of like, all right, well, you're going to go back. You're going to go and enter law school. I moved back to Stamford, Connecticut, which suddenly felt really, really small after living in India for a while.
Sure.
And then said, you know what? I didn't have a dime in my pocket, but I moved from Connecticut into New York. And that was 1995. And I've been here ever since. And so then just made my way into Fordham Law and kind of by accident ended up applying to this company called Jupiter. It was called Jupiter Communications at the time.
Right.
In 1996, just to do something while I was waiting for law school to start. But I realized that the culture there was very different than what had been communicated to me by my parents about how the corporate world worked.
Sure.
This was not, my dad's, Mad Men 1950, 60 type of a world. Music by the way, my dad was is a jazz saxophone player. Something that he mostly had to hide from his employer for most of his life, which is just to me is bizarre now, but that's what I grew up with. I thought you had to make a choice. And what ended up happening during law school, I was completely out of music. And then a good friend said, hey, listen, I'm not going to pressure you, but you love doing this. So just come sing backups. If you can't make rehearsal, I understand. Come sing backups. And then like 4 shows later, all of a sudden there was a keyboard in front of me. And I'm like, all right, I guess I'm playing this too. And then like a year later, I'm now singing lead for the band.
They sucked you back in.
And it was like, all right, well, I'm back.
That's cool. Well, that makes sense. It's an interesting thing that at one time, certainly you were discouraged to beyond the obligatory photo of the family on the desk at work or whatever. People were discouraged from sharing anything about their personal lives at work. You certainly didn't talk about politics or religion, that kind of stuff, but you didn't necessarily share much about your personal passions, or you weren't invited to until you were senior enough in an organization. And, nowadays the theme of authenticity, the personal interests that people have often make their way into the workplace in a way that was really kind of verboten at one time. So it's interesting to remember that. So I'm not done with your music career though. And neither are you, apparently. So I'd love for you to roll back about the beginning, about how you got your start. And I don't want to guide you too much, but after that first recital, that first performance, you clearly worked on other things. And I doing a little research, noted that you worked with Jimmy Ienner at one point, which is like kind of very cool and fascinating for people who don't know. He was a fabulously successful and prolific producer. Worked with the Raspberries on their biggest hits like Go All the Way. He worked on Eric Carmen's solo stuff like All by Myself. Produced the Dirty Dancing soundtrack, as I understand it, Three Dog Night, Grand Funk Railroad, Bay City Rollers. I mean, it goes on. It's hundreds of albums. And so that's a fascinating connection. And I understand that he's a Stanford guy. So was it a local thing? Like, how'd that all happen?
It was a bit of a local thing. So I went to West Hill High School and got to know a drummer, Jimmy Ienner Jr. And Jimmy had invited me to sing in his band. And long story short, I started bringing songs to them and we started working on them together. And they lived in a part of North Stamford, which was right next door to a really well-known recording studio. And so we just, like literally from mowing lawns and other odd jobs, put together a little bit of money and kind of got hooked up, I think, because of the Ienner name. But
sure.
But we were able to buy our way into some studio time. And then as luck would have it, Mr. Ienner was around that week. And so I literally, I'm 15 and I'm singing, like I'm working on a song and I've got Jimmy Ienner producing it. And by the way, another one of those examples of like, man, I didn't know how good I had it.
Wow.
Because like there were people that would have given their left arm to be able to work with him. And I'm like this, 15-year-old geek going, hey, listen, I don't mind you being here, but I really don't want you to get in the way of my vibe, And
I get it.
how he didn't just strangle me, I don't know, because I deserved it a couple of times.
Right.
But what a wonderful experience working with him. And I will add, the Ienner family was really, really good to me. My family had actually moved out to Utah when I was a senior in high school, and they had offered to let me stay with them, and so we were very close for a time.
That's really nice to hear.
Yeah,
That's a cool story. I imagine other people might have been completely intimidated to be in the room with him. I love that you weren't affected by that. You were able to take advantage of it in a positive way. That's fantastic. So I also have to shout out another, I think, celeb in this case that you worked with, Jerry Harrison. So most famously of Talking Heads, of course, but in my view, extra cool because he was in the Modern Lovers, Jonathan Richman's band. So how did that happen? He produced 2 of your records. Like, when did that happen? Tell me about that relationship.
Yeah, so I got to know Chris and Tina from the Talking Heads because they used to come see my college band, and they in case anybody doesn't know that, they've lived in Fairfield County for a long time now, right. And so I got to know them and pretty well, and several years later, when I had an album that I was really excited about, I was looking for a producer, and I talked to a whole bunch of people in New York. And one of the people I reached out to was Chris Franz, and Chris turned me on to Jerry. And Jerry and I met and really hit it off. We worked with Jerry. I worked with Jerry and a guy named E.T. Thorngren, who is probably the most talented studio engineer that you have never heard of. Right. Because he has worked with everybody and was, God rest his soul, he passed about a year ago, but was really one of the most talented people and influential people I've ever worked with.
Very cool. I actually recognize that name, but I'm a geek, so I'm not your, typical man on the street when it comes to recording engineers and studios and producers.
He I think his first song that he produced, because he was a musician, he was actually supposed to be on the Ed Sullivan Show like 2 weeks before Ed passed. So he had a whole bunch of weird near misses in his musical career. But his first song that he recorded was with Sugar Hill, White Lions.
Oh, really?
Right. Yeah, and that was his first engineering production credit. But he's worked with just about everybody.
Yeah, I have heard Sugar Hill stories from Doug Wimbish, who is in Living Color and was in the Sugar Hill house band for a while and played on a lot of their early stuff. I don't think on Rapper's Delight, for example, but he played on a lot of the early Sugar Hill tracks. And so I actually, somewhere here, I have a CD compilation for those of you who remember what CDs are, a CD compilation that Doug wrote the liner notes for, which is fantastic. I need to pull it out and go through it again. So that's cool stuff. So working with Jerry, though, I'm curious, like, was it different? I shouldn't ask the question this way. Let me rethink it. So a keyboard player, and as a keyboard player yourself, did that inform the approach at all? Was it helpful? I'm just curious if that played a role in the creative approach.
Oh, it's a great question. I'm not sure that it did. I think what played a role for Jerry, he's just so cerebral. He's been doing this for a long time. I mean, he's the band Live. He's produced a whole bunch of bands over the years.
Right.
And so he's sort of the classic, I don't want to say stereotypical, but almost in a comical way, record producer who, like, all right, Eric, E.T. and I are working on something. We've got it. Like, we're really excited about it. And Jerry wanders in and is like, no. The bass is all wrong. Do this, and this. And then he does it, and you're like, "Oh my God, the old version sounds so boring now." And it, he's just one of those guys that
that's
can just
cool.
Hear it, come up with a great idea, but he also doesn't try to steamroll you. He really tries to, like, okay, what is it you're trying to do with this?
Right.
So the funny thing about Jerry is we become pretty good friends over the years, and is sort of. I guess we all have mentors, and the thing that Jerry brings to the table for me, as much as anything, is that the musical side of his brain and the entrepreneurial business side of his brain are this very much the same brain. And I still find sometimes people like, you have to come in this room, you're a musician, this room you're a lawyer, and like
Right.
and Jerry ain't that guy. I mean, he is who he is, and is just. I sometimes call him the Wizard of Oz, and I'll get off of gushing about him now because
That's
people
okay.
don't
I
want to hear this.
asked. I asked.
But I will refer to him as the Wizard of Oz because his superpower is believing in somebody and getting them to realize how smart or how bright or how talented they are. And I can give you like example after example of non-musical people that Jerry has impacted in my short, 12 years of knowing him.
Right.
An absolute gift.
That's a special talent and a gift to be able to give to people. I love the way you describe that. So that's not gushing too much, not from my perspective. I like hearing this kind of stuff. So it also leads me to a theme that I was curious about. This idea of the entrepreneurial business side of music and the creative side of music living together in the same brain. What about for you? Do the legal and privacy topics find their way into music or vice versa? I'm sort of curious about that, and themes that are most compelling for you in songwriting.
Oh, well, yes. Okay, so I think that I deliberately won't separate the two, and so I had an entire album called Penultimate that is largely about the impact of big tech and how that has changed our lives. A lot of them are personal stories, but the theme of the album is clearly about the impact of big tech.
I see.
When I wake up, usually for me, by the way, and we may get into this, it's almost always a melody that just comes into my brain, and then I get a couple of chords, and then I record them on my phone, and then you get a couple of melodies on top of that, which almost always comes long before the song idea, like the topic, and so I will spend a lot of time wandering around either New York or Sausalito or wherever I am, but I seem to be in one of those places most of the time. And then the topic comes up, and the topic could be anything. And I really try to follow the muse and that, okay, I'm going to go down this weird alley, which, once you've started that this ain't going to be a pop song, but I'm okay with that as long as I feel like I've honestly and earnestly told a story about something, and I'm not afraid to tell stories about male toxicity or people that you might not like, which is weird because those are usually not the types of songs that other people want to listen to, although I've had some exceptions to that. But so I guess to more directly answer your question, it really, whatever I'm working through in my brain almost always comes through in my songwriting.
Got it. You addressed some things I wanted to talk about, which was, walking us through the process of how a song evolves for you. And I actually had the question, does it start with a melodic idea? Does it start with a lyric? Does it just happen? And I think you've covered some of it. But I'm curious more about how deliberate you are in the process and, how hard you have to work at it. You've already alluded to the fact that it takes time, and certainly, or at least it takes time after a certain stage. And, as a occasional, sometimes slightly inspired songwriter myself, I'm fascinated by the process academically, but particularly how other people spin it for themselves or how they take advantage of themselves. So I'd love for you to go deeper on this.
Sure, happy to. And like you, this is one of my favorite topics. For a little while, I dated someone whose father was an award-winning silversmith, and like we would just sit around drinking wine and discuss the creative process, which, as you imagine, silversmithing and music are a very different thing. But I love just getting into the weeds on that kinds of stuff. So
right.
I'm happy to talk about this all day.
Good.
So for the way it's worked for me most of the time is you just try to be open to ideas. I'll be working on something or walking down the street and a melody will come into my head. And it's very important for me that I sing it. I stop what I'm doing. My wife, it used to drive her crazy. I think now she accepts it. Because I'll be, walking down the street on a Saturday and I'm like, all right, wait. And I will sing something into my phone, and then I'll try to mimic a chord structure and a bass because I can't write now, but I'll come back to it.
Right.
And then it's a Saturday morning, and I'm starting to work on different songs. Part of that process is listening to old recordings and seeing if any of them happen to hit me. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And sometimes you start down that process and then you're like, screw it. And you just start doing your own thing. And then you've written something entirely from scratch that day.
Right.
So usually how this works is I end up with half to 3/4 of, like, I've got a verse and a chorus written and played on piano with some kind of like la da 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 ba ba da ba da, whatever, as you're kind of vocalizing
some melody, phrasing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then I'll wander around town listening to that thing and trying to come up with lyrics. I've had times where, like, I've written an entire song that I love in an hour. I've got songs that are from 6 or 7 years ago that I think are better than the lyrics I've been able to come up with are. And so they're still sort of waiting in some weird limbo.
Right.
And and so then I've got something that I can play and sing on the piano. Then the next thing is I use GarageBand. I love GarageBand. GarageBand, by the way, and you're a drummer, so I'm sure you have never ever said this, but GarageBand is the cure for every drummer who has told me it won't work at that tempo.
Got it.
and because so what I can now do with it, I've got this great band here in New York. I will record. I'll have a bass and some semblance of the guitar, although I'm not great with that. A keyboard thing. I got a great violin player, Lorenzo Ponce. Some harmonies. I've got a pretty finished product, and then they even have a drum component. And it's not like super fancy, but it gets the job done. And then with that, I'm able to put together charts. I have somebody who puts together chord charts, but then I can hand over like a bass and a violin chart to the folks in my band and go, this is what I want.
Right. That's very cool.
We build out at that and try to bring it a little bit more to life.
Right. So it's interesting because we're on the same wavelength here, because I think about the things I wanted to ask you about. You touched on where demos fit into your process. And so, I've always been fascinated by a little bit about me, the accessibility of music tech over the years. I mean, when I was a teenager, I got a hold of a 4-track, and then suddenly, and a synth and a drum machine. As a drummer, I was not a melodic or harmonic instrument player, but with a 4-track, I could play something on a synthesizer and rewind it 100 times if I needed to until I could get it right. And it allowed me to start tinkering in a way that would have been impossible if I had to go rent a studio and, get people in with me or whatever. And my friends certainly wouldn't have been patient enough to do it with me. So for me, it opened up the doors. Ultimately, MIDI toys and things like that really made it possible for me to really develop some thinking about production, about songwriting, and otherwise. It was long before I ever worked in proper recording studios or in those environments. And so we see those cycles in music technology, recording tech, that have sort of positively disrupted the industry over time. And so that accessibility for me was real. And I think for people who are actually talented, which I'm not, that accessibility is probably really enabling in a really powerful way. So you get to as far as demos. When you sit down and say, I'm going to go into the studio, do you do pre-production demos, or is that really more part of the songwriting process? Like, what about when you get to the band and then decide you want to go record something?
Well, usually what I'll do is I'll hand the band the demo, and ideally we'll be playing at least some of the songs out live, because that's sort of a great way to refine. But even if we can't do that, or we aren't doing as much of that, we'll work on it, and I'll get not quite the same. Like, you can go to, Euphoria here in New York, and you can get it. What I've learned is if you use their board mix and then I have a separate recorder. The board mix is very bass and drum heavy. The separate recorder gets the vocals a little bit better, and then I mix those two into one thing. You get a pretty good sounding pre-production demo, and so I'll use that, and that's really helpful in the like, man, do we really need that last verse? Kind of a thing, and you'll cut stuff. One of the things I learned, or I'm still learning, is less is more on every single level. And right now, when I say less is more, what I mean is like, it's better to have 4 awesome songs than 40 decent songs.
Right.
And I made a critical error during the pandemic. I'm not going to beat myself up about it because I was writing a ton, had a whole bunch of songs I was really excited about, and my band were all musicians weren't making any money then, and so I was trying to funnel some money through the band, as it were.
You're a good man.
And so I recorded 26 songs over a 4-day period.
Wow.
in a studio in Brooklyn. Now we had done a whole bunch of pre-production rehearsals with it. God bless my band. But I was actually in Sausalito, and we had piped my vocals in so they could hear them. And so my role was actually closer to that as like producer than vocalist, which has its advantages. But the mistake in all this was there is no way to try to put together 26 songs with anywhere near the level of care and delicacy that they require. And so once a month, now that was like 4 years ago,
right?
I'm still putting out songs from that recording process. Many of them I've like edited and redone and cut,
I see,
added in other parts, because this isn't nothing to do with my band. They executed what I asked them to do, but I was not paying enough attention to all of the nuances of the 26 songs regarding like, how are you going to make each of them special?
Right. I also wonder, given the sort of unbundling of the album, how relevant the sort of standard format of a 20 would have been 12 at one time, maybe it's 20 with a CD, became 20 with a CD. Is that even really relevant when you're thinking about sharing and just distributing music these days? I mean, I hope it's still relevant because I like the idea of albums. But I've debated this with my own band. Or we're going to go record. Well, what's our budget? Well, how many songs do you want to do? Well, we have to do at least this many. Do we? Or do we do 1 or 2 and then come back and do a couple more? And I don't necessarily have a strong opinion about it. There's advantages to, okay, you got your drum sounds. Okay, record a bunch. But I also wonder if there's some benefit in changing that cadence and doing a couple, listening, let yourself think about new ideas and sort of evolving the process forward in an iterative fashion, as opposed to trying to go in and nail it all in one shot.
Well, okay. So a couple of things. For me, I really liked doing 12-song albums. They were sort of manageable. It also meant I was always writing. But there are 2 advantages to approaching it that way. One is that when you do that, the album becomes a point in time representative of what the band is,
right?
And then where I am as a songwriter, because album 1 and album 4 are just going to be different. The vibe is different. The feeling is different.
Right.
I tend to also vary styles a little bit. So so making something as a single album, I think there's some advantages to doing that. The other thing, which is a little more pedestrian, is that my band are all in other bands like Bon Jovi and Avril Lavigne. And so getting all those wonderful, wonderful people into a 3-day camp situation where we go up to, upstate Connecticut somewhere and record, is just a challenge. I don't know that I would do that for 1 or 2 songs.
Understood. So provide some serious advantage that way. Got it.
Yeah. But the fun thing is, that's a separate question for how one releases them. And where I've come around to, and it took me a while to get there, is like, I'm just going to release singles, And when I have enough singles out there, I'm going to put them into an album. Because, well, two things. There's no benefit to only releasing one or two singles, just from a algorithm standpoint. Spotify rewards continuously releasing stuff. And then secondly, unless you are really, really famous or on the verge of being really, really famous, in my opinion, the PR play is at best overstated and in many respects borders on a scam. Because so the idea that like, oh, well, you got to do one single, two singles, three singles, and you pay somebody, I don't know, $3,000 to $5,000 a month for several months to get things into publications that you probably could have gotten into via alternative sources anyway.
Right.
And look, people should make their living, and there are people that do this really well. But if you're my age and you're not famous, I think you're more often than not, you're wasting your money.
I get that. Yeah, we've had some conversations about that. And, in these pay-to-play opportunities now to end up in MFA sites, made for advertising sites for those people who are not in ad tech, seems like the norm these days. It's like, wow, we're on a website. It looks like a magazine. Does anybody ever go there? And is it really as useful as us? I mean, with our band, we're still playing to what I call the obligated friends demographic, right? That the people who come to our shows because we go to their shows and that kind of thing. So we're not breaking out of that anytime soon. But the idea of having a bigger audience is exciting, but that ship may have sailed for us, or we may not deserve it, candidly, and that's okay. We enjoy the process more than everything else, and it's, for me, it's enough to be doing something every Saturday and playing and doing some recording and some gigs, and it keeps my head in the right space, as we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Yeah.
It's a good thing. And jazz is a new thing for me, which is deep and broad. And so suddenly I'm finding myself like learning to have to play drums all over again because it's so different, and learn so much material that I sort of knew, but didn't realize I really needed to know better and in more detail. But could be a whole other podcast sometime. Another question for you is, what advice would you give, not necessarily me, it could be me, or other songwriters? Have you come across any best practices that you would recommend? You have your process. What do you tell other people who may ask you how you do it? Because you're prolific, and so that's cool. Some people struggle to get one song done in their entire life. So tell me your thoughts.
Yeah. So every songwriter is lazy. I think we're talking about a matter of degree.
Okay.
And here's what I mean by that, because that's probably an obnoxious statement, but that's okay.
It's okay. You didn't hurt my feelings yet.
But like, I have to constantly challenge myself that this lyric isn't just good enough. I want this to be great. I want this to forward the story. And what I see is a lot of the time are people who just try to do it to get by. And by the way, like, all right, now I'm going to say something really inflammatory. There's guys like Billy Idol who the entire song is drivel except for "On the Blue Highway,"
right?
And that's all that matters, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sorry, I should beat up Billy Idol. Billy Idol is so much more famous than I am. And it's,
well, look, Kiss got all over with like Love Gun. I mean, so everything's good, right? So
no, and so but for me, I apply that everywhere. Like there, and you have to be you have to be careful with that approach, because if you wait until it's perfect, then you're Steely Dan. And
right.
and you had what, 1-2 albums that were absolutely mind-blowingly brilliant, but that's it. Maybe that's enough. I'm not here to say.
Understood.
So you can't, the idea that you need to do 100 different takes of a song, or that, I don't think that's true. But lyrically, man, that's where the thing gets sold. And I find myself not always focusing on that, because it cuts, it rips, it bounces.
Right.
But then you're like, my wife is great with this, because she's like, what in the world is that? And then you go, Okay, so that's I can't get
Wives,
by.
they can be so
Yeah.
brutal with good
Oh,
reason, and we need that. But yeah. I had a
yeah.
song I was pretty proud of. My wife said, it could use some tweaking. I was like, damn. And she's
But
right.
that's the thing
She's
as a
right.
songwriter, like the number of times where like I'm 3/4 way with through a song and like I'm already rehearsing my Grammy accepted speech.
Right.
Like you're just thinking this thing is brilliant.
I had an interesting experience with my band. There's a song of mine that we've been doing for a while, and a couple of the band members really like it. One doesn't love playing it because it's kind of simple for him and it's not his favorite thing to play. But the bass player in the band pointed out a particular lyric in the bridge. I'm not going to sing it or tell you what it is, but he said that lyric is like so good, and it's really like the point of the whole song. And it's he was talking about it on an emotional level, like what it means about the character that it was attributed to in the song. And he said, but if you would change this one word, you should be. Somebody else that actually suggested this change. He said you should be open to that change. It makes it so much stronger. And I was so wed to it, even though I had never really thought about it as like the perfect line. I liked it.
Yeah,
it conveyed what I wanted to convey, but I was really dug in on what to do. About like resisting change to this one word at the end of the line. And we're going to record it. And I'm trying to be open to reimagining it with that slight change and that it could be better, but it's taken some work.
well, it's hard though, because this is like your offspring and like someone is, someone is suggesting that you change it. And like,
Right.
I get in theory, you should be open to that. Some of it is also considering the source and where they're coming from, because sometimes it's not. I'm not suggesting your band is not. But sometimes it's not coming from the best place. It's coming from a place of jealousy.
Oh, there's always dynamics.
It's coming from a place of like stylistically, it's just not their cup of tea. I've had band members say like, oh yeah, that hook there. You just need to do. Can you do more of that? And then like they'll start trying to work it out in a separate key or like wait, what? You try to be open to that kinds of stuff, but maybe this is a tip for other people. It's such a hard balance, because if you are too open to feedback from a very talented band, you go down way too many rat holes, and you have to be very willing to triage things and say like, no, we're not doing this.
Yeah. I get that.
Because otherwise, particularly when you're the one, like this is my band, so I'm paying for the rehearsal time.
Yeah,
I'm paying
changes
for
the dynamics. Yeah,
and like, you know what? No, I don't think we want to turn this into like into a roots song where you guys all take solos for the last minute. Like, no, I don't think I want to do that.
No. That's interesting. Yeah, we all write in our band, which is cool. The all four, it's 2 guitars, bass, and drums, and we all write. And I enjoy that because what we put out as a group has some variation, and there's some good variety that I think keeps it more entertaining. But there's a sort of open commentary about everybody's songs, and yeah, sometimes we do go down a rabbit hole, like, oh, that ending, wouldn't it be cooler if we did this? And yeah, the answer might maybe, but we got a gig next week, and we also need to make it tight.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky process. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We could probably go on for hours, but I want to make this manageable for both of us and for our listeners and watchers, because we're on video as well. Let's talk about AI. That's the big shift here, which is particularly interesting to talk to you about, because as a songwriter, musician, attorney, privacy expert, you have what I imagine could be a unique perspective on AI. It touches intellectual property, privacy to some degree. I'd love for you to share your thoughts about how content creators, owners, tech companies, is there common ground, a framework to be found to manage this chaos and move the ball forward in a way that doesn't infringe on anybody's rights, copyrights, or, and at the same time, not stifle innovation and growth?
Okay. So
it's a mouthful, but that's what I'm sort of getting to, is like, how do we move forward well with AI?
So I think I want to answer first is Alan, the musician. So Alan, the musician, has probably resigned himself to the idea that like, I'm not going to make a whole heck of a lot of money. The Spotify thing is not, you can get millions of plays and still not really have a lot to show for it.
Afraid not.
I think that AI is an interesting set of tools that in some ways, to me at least, feels like the early days of auto-tune.
Sure.
Where there were people who used, or even some of the early days of sampling, I'm big going back a couple of years, where it came very gimmicky very quickly, and but some people used those things in a way that was sort of new, different, more creative. And so that's sort of intriguing to me, and that's sort of what I would want to focus on. The other thing is like we are definitely moving into an era where popular music is way more about polish than it is about the nooks and crannies. And I'm a nook and cranny person. I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to be polished. So I'm hoping that there is always going to be an audience for like the little broken parts of glass that is my thing. So that's my feeling as a musician. As a lawyer looking at the digital media space, I'm worried that if you think about, content creators need to be compensated, and it's gotten progressively worse since the days of Napster.
Indeed.
Like I can even look at the Napster world and go, all right, it was a bunch of kids just screwing around and we took a bunch of songs, but like half the time I ended up buying an album because I forgotten about the song. And like, you know what? I'm not here to date the ethics of that, but I kind of felt like, all right, that's maybe not the end of the world. But we're now in a place where, publishers can't keep the lights on. Some of that has to do with their own making. Some of it is that they've turned the keys over to the Googles of the world who keep taking a larger and larger cut of the revenue. But now as we move into the world of AI, where we have, a viable set of entrepreneurs who are basically saying, oh, no, this is all new. The traditional rules of copyright do not apply here. And oh, by the way, we're going to take all of that content, make it into something new and interesting, but we want to still be afforded the Section 230 liability shield. So it's sort of a weird, there's a viable group of entrepreneurs who are really just, if they have their way, we're 5 to 7 years away from not having a journalism industry and not having almost any type of content creation. Outside of, it'll be Disney, I guess. We'll have Disney still.
Yeah. I certainly worry about the future of journalism more than anything because its health is critical to the health of the planet. Let's put it that way. And I certainly don't want to see anything bad happen to the music industry. So I don't mean to diminish that when I talk about journalism. But things are changing quickly, and it scares me that the songwriters of the world, who in many cases are small mom and pop businesses, are really threatened by what could happen. People you've never heard of who write production music or do scoring or are doing sound libraries for multimedia and things like that. There's serious threat for people like that. Tell me, do you have predictions about the viability of Suno or Udio or any other scale Gen AI music platforms?
My hope is that it just becomes yet another thing that gets used. It becomes too much of a novelty, and that more and more consumers start to move away from that. Where I'm a little concerned are the tools that enable. So, there was a time where Ozzy Osbourne decided to go in and re-record a lot of his old songs with new musicians, which was clearly a let's take away some of the performance rights of those musicians so that they weren't getting paid. So they weren't getting paid every time the music got played. And I use that as an example because that's an old analog example that happened, I forget, maybe 20 years ago.
Right.
now you have a situation where you can recreate, I don't know, Losing My Religion, with a slightly different singer. And if played in the background of a restaurant, you may not know that it's a sound alike.
Yeah.
Now, if you're at home on your stereo, you'll probably pick it up. But what I've noticed is that there's a lot of places that are, every nth song, and some of them are every third or fourth song, falls into that, sound alike type of a category.
Right.
And that is deliberately so as to avoid paying music for their work.
Yeah.
I have a huge issue with that. But and by the way, this might be hypocrisy, so please call me out on this.
It's okay. You're entitled. We're all human.
I had a dinner time argument with my 17-year-old niece, who is an artist.
Mm-hmm.
I use Midjourney to put together graphics for my work.
I can see where this might be going.
$100 a year. Now, previously, I had tried to add graphics. Like, I went on to Upwork and I was paying like thousands of dollars to people so as to like, hey, can you give me a visual representation of data flowing across from the US to the EU?
Mm-hmm.
And, several hours and thousands of dollars later, I have something that doesn't give me anything.
Right.
I go into Midjourney and I peck around a bit and I come up with something that looks good, conveys something, usually in my own little goofy style.
Right.
Now, but what was pointed out to me there is that there are artists that are not going to work because people like me won't pay for it. Now, my counter to that is, I'm not going to pay thousands of dollars to get something, and I don't have the time to do it the old school way. And so so for me, it's either Midjourney or nothing.
I understand.
But there's a part of me that wonders if I'm being a little hypocritical here.
It's tricky.
So this has now turned into a therapy session. I don't know if you know that, Michael.
Well, I'm not. I'm neither going to, tell you you're right or you're wrong. I understand that struggle. I've hired people on Fiverr, and I've also, used drum machines on projects rather than playing the drums myself or hiring a drummer. Or I've used tools that, if you're using a auto mix from ROX or something like that, well, you could have hired a mixer for that. I probably couldn't afford to hire a mixer, wouldn't afford to hire a mixer. So am I doing something that a mixer could have gotten paid to do? Yeah. Did I really put him out of business? No. Even in the early days of drum machines, the same question came up. I was working in studios in the early and mid 80s, and the Lindrum was seen as a significant threat in the beginning. The synclavier was seen as a significant threat. The string players aren't going to work because of the synthesizers, and the drummers are not going to work because of the Lindrum. And there may have been some places where those decisions were made. Maybe one drummer didn't get booked and the Lindrum did. But a lot of drummers also learned how to program and, did other things or and whole genres of music became viable because of the drum machine or evolved because of the drum machine. Would you have EDM without sampling or without, would you have hip hop without it, sampling and later interpolation? So, the technology marches forward. We all know that. It doesn't always mean that it's good, and it will create challenges at different times. That's true in so many different categories now. It's not just AI, certainly. So I hope that makes you feel a little better about any potential hypocrisy.
No, I use GarageBand. Now, one of the reasons I use GarageBand is that drummers get really surly if you're trying to work through how the groove works as you're writing the song. Because it's just like, they get bored. They don't really want to spend some. So now I've got a tool to do.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So I don't know. I mean, I think, I guess my other counter to that is that there's probably were, people who rode stagecoaches. And at one point we put them out of business. I don't know where. Right. I don't know where the line gets drawn.
Yeah, I hear you. I use the buggy whip example for the same reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I'm certainly fascinated by assistive AI tools, those which are enhancing the creative process, and I think there's huge value in some of those tools. I use stem separation not to do remixes and not to infringe on anybody's rights from an ethical perspective, but I don't hesitate to stem separate a song that I'm trying to learn if you have to learn a cover, or if I need to, or I want to really understand what a drummer was doing on a track and I can't hear it well enough in the mix. Separating those drums out can be a great way to learn it. And, I don't have any ethical qualms with that whatsoever. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all lays out. So one thing I want to ask you, for somebody who's worked in business and creatively, is, have you ever felt like giving up when it came to probably the music and creative things? Was it ever an option for you to say, I'm not going to become a rock star, so I'm going to stop doing this?
Oh, I've given up a bunch of times. Like I mean, this is where the lawyer in me now we're going to have a debate on what it means to give up.
That's okay.
But I think that there are times where you realize that the current situation you're in is futile, and maybe it is. Like, again, I was like an 80s keyboard player in 1991.
Right,
when
as you mentioned,
those guys, there just wasn't a lot out there. I pivoted a little bit, but I certainly had times during those years where I didn't think that there was going to be a path forward. I had a well, this is kind of a funny story. So I did an ad agency battle of the bands. At the time, I was outside counsel to Havas. They could not have been nicer to me. I said, hey, can I use your name and have my band, which is mostly like ad tech geeks, come play this? They're like, yeah, sure. Can we get you a case of beer? We'll give you a sign. Like, they couldn't have been nicer about it. So we were at the Highline Ballroom, and my guitar player, right after the sound check, decides to stay in the venue, and he gets fed top shelf drinks from everybody. So it's time for us to go on. Nobody can find him.
Oh no.
And when he showed up, I can't even explain to you how drunk this guy was. And I'm show's got to go on. And he couldn't figure out how to turn his amp on, which I should have left it that way, because he turned it on. It was the loudest thing in the room and was playing something that had nothing to do with what we were playing.
See, this is what happens when the excesses of the ad industry and the music industry collide in a specific way.
So I'm now, by the way, I have, 30 people from client companies in the audience, not including the Havas guys.
Oh, wow.
And so this is absolutely humiliating. Someday I'll tell you the whole story. But one of the outputs of that was I realized that for what I wanted to do, I couldn't play with friends. And I'm friendly with my band. I consider many of them close friends.
Right.
But I pay them, and I know they're going to show up on time. And I know that I'm not going to get a song and a dance about, that they don't feel like playing song 7 or whatever.
Got it.
And so I don't know, that's a too long-winded way of answering your question, but I think you constantly have to find things that you love about everything that you're doing, because there will be plenty of times where you fall out of love with those things.
Got it. That's a great way for us to wrap things up. I have one or two ancillary questions, if you can do them. They're fast, though.
Absolutely. Let her rip.
All right. What was your first concert?
I saw the Cars. I was 15, and they're still one of my favorite bands.
Yeah.
Maybe not the best live show. Those guys were just glued. Like, it was almost like the original shoegazing thing, where they're just they're playing, they're just standing, and you're like, the band that opened for them, Wang Chung.
Oh, really? How cool.
And Wang Chung, they were fun. These were guys that were just playing with reckless abandon and were just a ton of fun.
Nice.
So, huge fan of the Cars. Maybe not my first choice for a concert.
I didn't fully appreciate the Cars at the time when they first, sort of rose to fame. But in retrospect, I have really become a Cars fan. I really have.
Yeah.
So that's a good show to have seen. Anything you've seen recently? It doesn't have to be your last concert or your last live music experience, but is there anything new and interesting that you want to share?
Oh, well, I was good. Interesting, yes. New, no.
That's okay.
What comes to mind is Neil Young.
Yes.
It was, I've only seen Neil a couple of times. My wife and I are talking about trying to catch him up in Connecticut this fall. We got to figured out. He is just so good, and he's also of that age where like you don't know how many more times he's going to be going around, and certainly his contemporaries at his age are not as strong as he is, and that's not to diminish anybody else.
I get that.
How is that guy such a badass?
Oh man,
now
I'm a huge fan and have seen him multiple times in some of those weird situations when he did like the International Harvesters or whatever, some of the things that didn't feel like typical Neil Young. And then I saw some like Rust Never Sleeps type of shows that were fantastic. And I love the Crazy Horse configuration and so many other things that he's done. Always interesting live, and most of the time really, really good. So that's a cool thing.
Probably another piece of advice that I've learned. Because I think Neil embraces this chaos. You have to make things a little chaotic and a little weird. Otherwise, people around you get comfortable.
There you go.
And the worst thing that can happen to you as a creative person is to have a band or others around you be too comfortable in their roles.
Got it.
And I think that's why he's been able to, like, I don't know anybody who's written really good songs in 4 decades.
Yeah, that's a good point. He's been doing it for so long. And every so often I come across a video of some Neil Young performance, and I'm just stunned by how good it is. There's one that floats around. I think it was an SNL performance of Rockin' in the Free World, but it wasn't purely Crazy Horse. It was a mixed band. I forget who else was in the band. I'll send you this video.
Please do.
It's just such a monstrous performance. Like every time I come across it, I'm like, oh man, was that good? So that's cool stuff. So with that, I think we should stop because I don't want to leave any 5-year-olds unattended. It doesn't feel like the right thing to do. Although I feel like we could go much longer on some of these topics, but
it's been a lot of fun. So I think we could have too.
So thank you. This is really fun for me, and I'm grateful for you doing it.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks so much, Michael. It was great chatting with you.